and then they can do a lot of work. It is already emerging as a very big business in US, and I'm sure even in India, you will see a lot of business in data aggregation, and then building whatever models is required, and then taking it to the market. Right? So that I see as a very big aspect in terms of stakeholders involved in big data. And the other big stakeholder is basically people who are actually building the big data solutions. I mean, that's where we come back to the universities and what kind of people would be required. In my opinion, very important thing that's also emerging from the discussion is that it's not just a mere technical skill, it's not a mere business analyst skill, it's a kind of a big data mindset that people will have, that he's looking for some solutions, hidden solutions somewhere, with all this plethora of data that's available. So that big data mindset, I don't know, it's going to be a big challenge for people to train them in that mindset.
Okay.
I'll add a couple of points here. See, first, all of us need to understand that big data is a means to an end.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. See, in the time of inception of the IT industry, we thought IT was a standalone industry, but then finally it became the bedrock of most of the other industries. So IT became a component of all the other industries rather than be considered as one. So come back to big data. Data has always existed. We converted some data into information when it was in a very linear, programmatic, simple to handle kind of a format. Data warehousing has existed for many years in India. But when information turns into insight, that is really where the thinking of inside out to outside in matter. It is very, very important for one to reach closer to the customer. Because today, what governs your behavior is what they want and not what you want to give.
Yes.
Right? That's what I mean by outside in rather than inside out. And then when you process such information, when you begin to understand what is a retailer's buying pattern or what is a healthcare related information, so ultimately this is applicable to any industry, telecom, finance, healthcare. You take any industry, it will work.
Yes.
So if you recall, at a time when the ERP began to take over, on one side we had a set of people capable of programming the ERP language. Today, it's become three vectors. One is an infrastructure understanding, an IT skill. Second is an analytical skill. So first is where to go. Second is what to do. Third is how is it applied. Where to go is an IT skill. What you do with it is or what you get out of it is an analytical skill. What you do with it is a business skill. So going back to the ERP days, you started to get functional consultants. So you had an HR expert sitting there in defining the ERP format. You started to have a supply chain expert sitting there. I think we're headed there. So what we actually need is a big data is a means to an end. And the data became big because data got converted to information, got converted to insight. And that insight happens with the business knowledge or the functional knowledge. So you're going to have a category of functional experts, you're going to have a category of data scientists, you're going to have a category of IT practitioners. All of them together is going to constitute this ecosystem. And how it applies in any industry is dependent upon which industry the customer is in, what they want to do with such data. It can apply in pharma research, it can apply in financial inclusion services, it can apply with Aadhaar parties, it can apply anywhere. So this continuum is very, very difficult to get with one set of people. Right? So you're going to have multiple levels of people, all coexisting and all delivering different output, the sigma of which is going to give exactly what you want.
So then the next question is that, so how do you build such teams? Because like you mentioned, data science is in itself a highly skilled requirement.
Right.
Then you're talking of technology.
Correct.
I'm sure that the kind of technology and the kind of people we are talking of who have that kind of technology expertise is not your regular lower end of the pyramid, regular software, Java and .NET and PHP kind, right? I'm sure that you need, and I don't think it's just core skills, it's also applied skills in the technology space.
Exactly.
And then finally, like you said, there are the domain experts.
Exactly.
I'm sure the domain experts are available because in your other businesses also you are requiring domain experts, like you gave the example of ERP. So how are you building teams of like this really cutting edge technology people as well as data scientists?
It's exactly what you said. Look at how programming evolved. You had to develop a software. You broke that down into building blocks. So there was somebody who did that. And then each of the building blocks had a certain requirement. So there was a project lead or a program lead for each of them. And then underneath that, there was a set of people who were coding. Likewise, if you look at it, there are a set of people who will handle data. But which data to use, what you want to get from it, is a set of people who will define that. So they could be mid-level skills. And then how does that data become a business insight is a business leader's prerogative. So they would have such, so it's going to be a combination of skills, somebody who could be seasoned in the business or somebody who is seasoned in a particular industry, like a pharma or a education or whatever. So there could be a leadership from there, which gets broken down into what the building blocks of how we want to handle it are. So for example, when HR decides that they're going to hire people and they're going to search the social media for what all information that this person has posted, that becomes a good source of information which your friends will never share. You could do any amount of references, but that's word of mouth, and you tend to eulogize when you get a reference of any of your friends or acquaintances. But what you post on social media is forever there. What photographs you share is there, and that's the personality. A combination of all of that is the personality. So you get a lot more insight of the person at the time of hiring that you never had in the past. So that, what you want to do is going to be defined by the HR leader. Where do you go for it is going to be defined by the IT practitioner. And how do you get that is going to be done by the bricks and mortar guy.
The
So
kind
there
of
are three
skills
kinds
that
of skills.
we are looking for, I mean, to answer your
One
question in
second.
terms
The
of
reason why I asked this question, just to give a little more perspective on this, is because we had a similar discussion in Delhi last week. And I'm sure Bangalore obviously has, I would say, a richer pool of people in the technology space. But the thing which really came out was that there's actually a dearth of very good data science people as well as very good technology people. But I'm obviously coming
That is
from
true.
where
I think absolutely right.
It is
because
true.
if you look at the whole concept of data science, it's application of analytics to solve a business problem. And let's be very honest, business leaders still now have employee gut as a means of making decisions. And you could probably still go and talk about business leaders using analytics and so on and so forth. But I think the mindset is, I've got 18 years of experience, who knows the customer better or who knows the situation or the conditions better than I do. I think no analytics can tell me what I should do. I think that's a mindset that needs to change. And if that mindset doesn't change, then you can talk about data science, you can talk about analytics, you can talk about everything. It's not going to work. So that mindset change is required. And to drive that mindset change, you need people who are coming in with more analytical thinking, who have the ability to analyze data and the ability to synthesize decisions based on data patterns and so on and so forth. So I think the first training ground is, the business analysts who are actually employed to support a business leader cannot just go and throw reports at the business leader. I think they have to essentially present hypothesis.
Exactly.
And the hypothesis presentation is a tough job. And that is where I think you need a combination of analytical skills, statistical skills, industry domain, and so on and so forth. And this is an area where I believe there is a huge dearth of skills. And I think there are two opportunities here. One opportunity is, can you industrialize this? Difficult, yet possible. Where, some of these outcomes or some of these signals, as they call it, and if you read the book from Nat Silver called Noise to Silver, some of these signals can be essentially industrialized, can be, the patterns can be looked into, and, certain outcomes can be derived out of it. So you need people who can industrialize these signals, people who can potentially write these outcomes and write these programs which can basically give you the outcomes as a combination of that. So that's one part that I think is a great opportunity for us as IT service providers. How do we industrialize the output? The other is obviously organically building these skills. So you will have to follow a path of both, industrialization as well as organically building the skills. There is the pyramid's kind of somewhere going to come and meet. They're going to be parallel tracks as of now, but it's somewhere going to converge, and you will find a good combination of people who are going to do this. But net, it has to be a tangible way by which you reach the business leader. The business leader has to believe in what's coming out of it. And I believe that's where the academia plays a very important role. I mean, if you look at management institutes, I think management institutes should inculcate the culture of more data-driven decision making, and kind of make that a premise for for selecting managers and so on and so forth, or even their course curriculum should be driven around that. That's going to be an important factor. And these are the guys whose first stepping stone would be that of a data scientist, who will essentially help the leader, when eventually they may become the leaders. And I think that's a huge opportunity that the industry has, and we as an organization, or we as a we as the ecosystem of India have. Because so far, India has been seen as a hub of IT services, IT professionals, people who can throw a programming job at an Indian programmer and he will come out with flying colors better than anybody else. But where we have lacked is our ability to innovate and think and then apply and come out with a solution. That's why the number of products coming out of India are probably meager compared to what you see from even a small country like Israel. So that culture has to change, and that's, I think, a huge
I
opportunity.
just wanted to get back to the combination of skills point that you're making. So that's a key as far as the data scientist is concerned.
Yes.
And we also have to differentiate what part of that is trainable, and what part of it is very innate. Right? Certain things, like I think Sridhar was making that point. It's not just about programming where very algorithmic kind of a thinking. We are looking for people who have a non-linear
Creative.
kind of a thinking.
Yes.
I mean, that doesn't, a lot of it doesn't come through training. I mean, somebody innately has that talent. So we'll have to look for what aspects of technology we can train. What is this part that is there with people? And then, of course, we will have to see how these two can be blended together. That's a big challenge as far as from the training and the academic perspective.
I think one of the points that Glenn said, I think it's a good point for this now. In the time when the IT explosion happened, we started off doing a lot of coding, and that became a T&M, and that became a structure which we never got out of. And as we wanted to get higher up in the ladder in terms of value-added services, in terms of delivering more outsourced solutions, and I think we figured out the way over a period of time. But I think I'll second what he said. There's a great opportunity for us to productize some of these services, because like I said, given that these are 3 layers of skills, there is definitely going to be at the lowermost end data management, or what algorithms you develop and how do you derive something out of it is going to be one set of skills which will over a period of time get commoditized. At the next level, what are the building blocks that constitute that is going to be a little bit higher in terms of the level, but it could still be at a level of part sourced from outside. Right? That could be a productized solution. But a complete outsource could happen where the organization says, this is what I want to do, these are the sources of information, you do everything for me. That's when you start to think for them. You think as them.
Yes.
Right?
That
So
would really be the high end.
That would be the highest end.
Yes.
That is when you outsource the entire big data project of an organization. So I think we will evolve in this methodology, but the sooner we learn to productize this, and to his point, the number of IPs that have come out from India are very less.
Yes.
Here's probably a biggest opportunity where we look at productizing them and look at capsulizing in a format in which it is reusable, repeatable in specific, and it's all going to be industry specific. It's all going to be vertical segment specific. The more we are able to productize it, the more we are able to leverage the repeatable skills, I think that will measure the success for us.
In fact, they say that, right? I mean, the irony of the matter, I mean, in India is that, we are one of the biggest producers of iron ore. So we export iron ore and we import stainless steel.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think, in some sense, it's probably a problem. It could be a problem that could repeat with big data. We could probably be very good at aggregating big data, but we might have to import skills which will actually help us analyze or derive an outcome, or the finished product of, get the finished product out of big data.
I wanted to exactly move this discussion to that existing talent, as against, what is your expected talent?
I think
My
I
skill.
will divide this into 4 buckets, okay, for
Yes.
ease of understanding. See, there is a promise of big data, and there is a practical situation right now, right? So let me break this up into 4 buckets as I see it. Obviously, we'll have different cuts of that view, and that's fair. So one is on the technology side, right? I think Srinivasan initially talked about the pigs and the mahouts and the Hadoops and everything that goes with technology. So that's one aspect of skills standpoint, saying there's new things coming up. They're coming up so fast. It is still very niche. It is still considered very niche. But as an industry, we deal with this, right? I mean, we have seen this during, from mainframe days to client server, and everybody said client server is different skill, we figured this out. Then the internet came up, different skill, we figured it out. So that's something that we will deal with, right? The second one is around maturity from that technology, because, the innovation that's happening in the consumer world, whether you take it in the world of Facebook, so the Googles, and what big data means in that scheme of things, actually is shifting the paradigm of how we look at an enterprise landscape. How will applications of tomorrow be built? Because the big data technologies as we see it today will not be restricted to big data alone. it really will permeate the enterprise. It will permeate businesses. It will permeate the way we look at how systems will be built in the future. So there's a paradigm shift that needs to go through in terms of how will we build systems of the future. It will be more distributed. It will be more multitasking. It will be more cloud oriented. It will be more elastic. It will be more data agnostic. So all of that things need to come into play, and that's a different thing that we have to start looking at, saying how do we shift the paradigm of how do we start building new enterprise systems and integrate them in the future. So that's the second component, which is more the medium to long-term standpoint, but we have to start thinking about that in figuring out. And that's something I think there is probably an intervention required at the education institution level, saying, does the paradigm of programming change in this context? Will SQLs as we know it in the past still be true 5 years from now? Will the data construct of relational database be the same as we have known and studied for the last 15, 20 years? It will probably change, and we need to understand what those are. The third thing is around, which is at a slightly more higher level, is around data strategy itself, right? Our whole design of enterprise and data has always been master data centric. It will likely be analytics centric going forward, right? And that is something that people who learn data strategies, master data management, data governance, with data as a center of learning, I think we'll have to start thinking more about. And we have seen already in some parts of the world, and I recently read about this in Canada, that there is a course specifically being introduced for data strategies of the future. And that is something that universities and industry together have to work together in figuring out what that should look like from a future standpoint. And finally, obviously, we talked about that is data science itself, right, which is about statistics, about algorithms. I mean, I think statistics and our focus on statistics traditionally has been for a different industry.
Yeah.
It has been for finance.
Yes.
It has not been for this part of application of how statistics are being looked at. So the volumes that we have in people trained in statistics is just not enough. So we have to bring in a different perspective in teaching statistics, in looking at statistics differently, saying the world of statistics and how it is applied in tomorrow's world is going to be far varied and of different nature compared to how statistics has been taught in the past and how it has been applied in the field today. So data and data science, I think statistics is a very important part of data science, and that probably is a key source of our talent pool from data science perspective. And we will see that the gap in availability of data science is going to keep increasing on a day-to-day basis, and it will take a long time for the industry to catch up. And this is not a skill that can be trained, as part of a training course. This is something that has to be there from the fundamentals of learning. So while we can produce data scientists, with the needs that we see on an incremental basis, but the volumes that the industry needs going forward is something that has to be catered to. And I think India has definitely a very unique opportunity on two counts. One is, we actually have a talent base which has been, pretty much running a large part of information management of global organizations. We have invested in training, we have invested in reskilling people, we have invested in retraining people who come out of universities. And secondly, I think that the advantage that we have is, I think our ability to bring together the strengths of IT and BPO is probably unique in the world. Because when you look at domain and understanding operations, understanding domain, and how do you actually run different parts of organizations from a business perspective, and bringing that together, I think we have a very strong opportunity of doing that. At the same time, if we can engage the universities, if we can engage educational institutions, if we can influence curriculum that looks at 3 to 5 years from now, and get ready with the needs of what the industry needs going forward, I think focusing on statistics, focusing on data governance of the future, focusing on how we see applications that need to be built and constructed in the future. And that's probably where we can probably fast track our opportunity in the global market. So I think these are the 4 buckets I would put it, technology.
I'll make a big point on that statistics stuff alone, because it's a very important point that you made on statistics. I just wanted to emphasize that. Because India traditionally, we are known for producing a lot of good statisticians, but there's been, but what we are talking about in big data is statistics with a different kind of a flavor. Because statistics, for example, is worried so much about sampling.
Yes.
In big data, there's no worry about sampling.
Yes.
We don't want to do.
There's enough data to look at, and there's
want to look at all the data.
yeah, absolutely.
So it's a totally different kind of a statistics thing thinking that we want to bring it. So it's more about patterns, searching for patterns, understanding correlations. That's a kind of new flavor that we need to give to whatever statistics training is being given.
So it's interesting.
I think it's a great point, because what I have seen is, when you look at people who have got degrees in statistics, they're very good with, coming and telling you, the algorithms and the statistical model and stuff like that. But what is really missing is the application. Now,
Yes.
if I come and say,
Very
the
true.
guy knows correlation algorithm like the back of his hand. Now, if I ask him to solve a market basket problem, the guy starts scratching his head. So it's the same thing about asking a kid what is 5 plus 3 versus, constructing it as a problem statement saying somebody had 5 pencils and somebody had 3 pencils, so if you put together, how much is it? So I think it's basically a flaw of our education system where we are taught 5 plus 3, but we're not taught how to arrive at 5 plus 3 or how 5 plus 3 is going to be used in the real life.
So it's
And that's
it's interesting that being a statistician, it's a mixed feeling, right?
So you're an evolved statistician.
Yeah, looks like so. I know Avnish is my junior. He's also a statistician. So
I looks like I touched some raw nerves.
no, I think I completely agree with what Jan talked about. This whole concept of being more mathematical, being more theory oriented needs to change, no doubt about that. I think in the last 13-14 years, what we have seen, there are 3 islands in analytics, right? One set of people who are interested to make sure the data is available to you, right? So there will be people who will go any technical details to, and they're really excited about making it work. And there are a set of people who are, statistician, machine learning people who doesn't want to, get into the data. They said data is God. So whatever I have, I'll figure out something out of it, right? And then third people who are like, domain people who comes in between. And I think the combination of some of them is what we have really seen people excelling over time. The only big difference which in today's world is, I think as statisticians 13-14 years back, when you used to look at data, the data is all given to me. I have seen that data 14 times, 15 times, 50 times. I know exactly how it looks like. I know the set of problems, and if not me, somebody else has solved the problem and I can follow that path. Today's world, the data is changing every day, right? Today's world, the problems are very, very unstructured. And that's where probably many of the statisticians, data scientists are facing challenge in terms of being able to kind of come out of those typical problems being solved to solve problems which are very, very unstructured, very new. Data is new. I have never seen that data at any point of time. And I need to really get into the data part. I also need to understand a little bit about the technologies which is creating the data. Otherwise, I have seen cases where say something like a social media solution is built where the number of observations on which you are actually taking a call on what people feel about you is so small that it's not even representable enough, right? So that's why it's very important for these data scientists to not only be statisticians or machine learning people, but also be able to link, being able to kind of connect the dots, being able to understand the data. And that's where I think there is a significant gap.
I think
Yes,
that's a
definitely,
great
yeah,
point.
my-
Because, and I think the vice versa is also true, because people who are actually constructing these data warehouses and these platforms for doing analytics also need to understand the application of the same. Now I think you brought up a great point in terms of someone trying to do a sentimental analysis with 10 records, right? I mean, probably that's the only record set that the guy who was trying to scrape the data or look at one of these social media listening platforms could get, and that's what he gave in, without really understanding that that's a very statistically insignificant size. So I would think that the vice versa is also true.
Absolutely.
So for people who have the ability to kind of marry the whole thing, and that's why I call these guys big data analytics guys. People who have the ability to understand the big data as in what the data is, what are the constituents, how does it come in, how does it get applied. And similarly, from an analytical perspective, people have an understanding of, what is the data and so on and so forth. These are the people who are really going to be required in the industry.
I have a slightly orthogonal view. I mean, I agree there's otherwise we wouldn't be discussing here. There's a dearth of the skills, and we know we got to let's call the elephant in the room, right? I think Sridhar's point and Pritam's point, I think it's very fair. We have, if you look at it, peel the onion and say, what are the buckets of people we need? We need data architects, which will focus on cleansing the data, data governance, integration, correlation, all the stuff, and making sure it is you serve and store the data, right? And there's a people who are set of people where you have analytics who focus on statisticians or mathematicians and so on, right? And then there's a third category of people who are the industry experts, business strategy, looking at how do I transform continuously to take advantage of it. There's a culture shift needed here, I think. There's an integration of all these three people working together absolutely is a fundamental shift we have to see. That's the element, I think, which is going to make key difference in every enterprise.
Yeah.
Just let me finish my
I
talk.
think I absolutely agree with you. And I think that's something
That's a culture shift and a mind shift, a paradigm shift where we have to work as one team, no more silos of organizations to leverage each other. How do you bridge the gap, right?
Working in their silos, right? And I think that's going to be a very critical effort when we are looking at, with some of the statistics around 4 million plus, individuals will need, from a talent demand perspective globally, right? And the estimate says that we'll be, only with the current supply of talent, only 1/3 of that talent probably will be able to suffice, right? Which means that we have to think out of the box, when we are talking about talent generation and skill development. It cannot happen just through training. It needs to happen at a fundamental level, at the universities, in the schools. It needs to start happening there. And I think as the industry practitioners, we have to, it's a responsibility for us, for the next 10 years to start seeing the curriculums that each of the companies are building in their own houses, right? How do we start infusing that into the universities, right? And work very closely, not just in India but globally, because it's not about just a India talent pool question. It's actually a global talent pool question. So how do we work with global universities, and Indian universities being one of them, to start infusing those curriculum and take ownership in driving those curriculum, right? So that people start taking that as a career option right from the universities, right from the colleges, rather than kind of landing up saying a big data is a good place to be, and now how can I skill myself, right? I think that's going to be a fundamental shift that needs to happen between industry and academia, as well as some of the industry bodies coming together to make that kind of a strategic investment for the next 10 to 15 years.
I think Arnav had a very interesting point around visualization, and that's a piece that I think sometimes gets completely ignored. Because how you represent this data is actually going to be extremely important, especially when you're showing it to an audience that probably does not have too much of a clue in terms of technology, or just wants to look at the data. I'll just give you an example. There was a data set that was given to us, and it was a data set of assets with longitude and latitude, and we kind of circulated it with a bunch of guys, and we said, what do you think about it? So everybody looked at it and said, yeah, it all looks fine. So what we did was we took that and plotted it on a map. And we figured out, and this was for UK, so we figured out that 10% of the assets were actually in the Atlantic Ocean. So that's the power of visualization. I don't think, and this is another skill that I think is not going to be found in universities, and at least in technical universities. And this is where I think we need to start looking beyond the so-called technology courses and technology folks, and get more to the creative side, where you get the more creative guys. In fact, I know for a fact that NID has a program on product design and graphical user interface and stuff like that. So how do we inculcate the whole concept of big data, the big data visualization, and courses like that into these parts of our education system, which are traditionally not thought of as contributing towards a IT initiative or an IT program, and they do, but not as much as they probably ought to do. So I think this is a very important point that we need to look at. It can't just be focused only on the technical side or the technology side, or maybe even the management side of the education. But I think there's also what should I say, the creative side. Which side is it, right or left? One of the sides of the brain, right? So that side of the brain also needs to be brought in when you're looking at big data as well. And that's
one
that's
positive there that I want to look at, building on that, is the kind of approach and attitude of youngsters today, millennials, who may already be there, having this kind of a non-linear or creative thinking. I have a teenage son, compared to whom I am technologically disadvantaged. So he plays a lot of games on PS3, and so every time he keeps telling me, why can't we look at all problems as video games, and or PS3 games. That's the way industry is moving. We are talking about gamification of business. A lot of models are being built and saying, can we, the fight for market share, can it be turned into a game? right? So a lot of this thinking is already there in youngsters. I mean, we need to see how we can tap that. That is one point. The second related to that is we also have to train our people to think in terms of, customers. I mean, suppose if you're working for a bank, start thinking like what kind of customer experience this bank would like to give. Start asking those questions. So banks want to give, say, let's say, a particular kind of experience to customers, and based on that, they're going to modernize all their applications. So these guys are not just working on maintenance of applications or enhancing applications. They are modernizing the applications to ensure that this bank wants to give this digital experience to their customers. So then you will be asking different kind of questions. You are no longer just a requirements gathering person. You are actually having a lot more meaningful conversation with the bank and saying what kind of experience you want to give. I think that mindset has to be trained as well as it has to come naturally. But we'll have to tap the very creative instincts of people right at the engage.
I'll make a comment on this. I'll make a comment on this visualization. I think it's a very fantastic point. I mean, on the other, I want to make a couple of comments on that. So it's not a skill you can teach. I mean, there's a huge opportunity for innovation. As you look into this whole technology space, the inner you go into the circle, whether it's system software, or operating system level, or firmware, to go to the database layer, to the application layer, and out of the circle you go, the faster the technologies change. The core, the inner you go, it takes longer, right? You had, if you look at the web UIs, when you got client UIs, thick technology, thick UIs, thick clients, to web UIs, web 1.0 to 2.0 to now semantic web, and now you're talking about completely revolutionizing UI, and how do I plot the graph, and how do I look at the graph. So I think the conceptual part of it is innovation. We need to focus on how do you continuously innovate in that space, and how do you present the data in a meaningful way to reinvent yourself. That's something, I don't know if it's a skill you can be taught.
Yeah,
I
think on the
I want to leave that there.
Yeah, so on the visualization, what we have seen is it's a kind of I would say literacy, visual literacy I call it, right? Because not people don't come with it naturally. To your point, right? It's kind of, some people are gifted, and they tend to kind of look at things in a certain visual pattern.
I still don't know which side of the brain is right or left.
But I think it's something, if we have to scale, especially consumption of big data related analytics, visualization is going to be a key enabler for doing that. And to scale that, right? A visual literacy kind of a program is going to be very important, so that it's always good to have some people who are gifted, but then how do you kind of make that a way of thinking, so that when you look at data, certain patterns start emerging in front of you, saying that, okay, this is the way I think if I visualize, my customer, it's going to resonate with my client or the stakeholder, right? And that's the way I can make the point. Otherwise you might have some great analysis, but if it is not resonating with the stakeholder, there is going to be zero action out of it. Right?
I think the biggest challenge is basically, making some of these so-called arts subjects into a science. And I think, while it can't be taught, I think that's a challenge that we have. Because if, we were to kind of talk about some of the people being gifted and leveraging their skills, I mean, we're going to constrain ourselves and make this completely a discipline that's run by a few thousands of people. And I think that's not what we want. I mean, what we want is how can we kind of broad base it? Because that's when the adoption is also going to rise from an industry standpoint.
I think that's a great point.
I have a different view on that. I have a different view on that because, see, there is always going to be, like I said, 3 different vectors. Where do you find the data? What do you do with the data? How do you handle the data? And what do you do with the outcome? These are 3 different skills. At best, you may get 2 out of the 3 with one person. But where I differ with what you said just now is that it is okay for us to have a set of people who are able to deliver that. Take an advertising agency. How many creative directors do you have compared to the number of salespeople, account management people, as well as the others who handle the media? So the number of creative people there is very limited, and they have their own method of thinking, and they bring out the outcome. So what it actually points out to is a different thing. In this big data industry, what's going to happen is there's going to be a linear growth industry, a line function kind of a growth. And then there are going to be people around that who could be the ones who are able to handle the data, or who could be the functional experts, or who will look at how does this data get into business. Those people will definitely be few in number compared to the number of people you want to handle the data with.
No, I think the key point that Jayant is trying to make, and I completely agree with what he's saying, is, see, it is, the number may be a different issue. You know, where you're talking about thousands and hundreds of thousands versus tens of thousands and five of thousands. But the challenge that we have as an industry is how do you bring it all together?
Yep, that's exactly
Right.
right.
I mean,
right on.
the bringing it together is extremely important. The point I was making earlier, I think then Kaushik was talking about, you know, silos, and we have to break the silos. It is very imperative for us to make this work, that the different groups that can bring the strengths together work together. Because traditionally we have seen this as different boxes. I mean, I can go back into time, and you know, when we did programming on mainframes, it was about transaction processing. We threw green screens at the business, and then we had GUI, and then internet was more integrated with the business. But we still